Now, yesterday morning, Democrats came to the floor of the Senate to try and pass the assault weapons ban and other life-saving gun safety legislation. Sadly, Republicans stood in the way of the Senate passing life-saving legislation to get rid of the scourge of gun violence in America. Just hours later, we learned of yet another shooting on the campus of the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Our prayers are with the victims of the shooting at UNLV and their families. Our prayers are with the students and staff of the university reeling from this horror. And thanks to the brave law enforcement officers who responded to the shooting and prevented even more deaths. The pain from these shootings in these communities never truly fades, Mr. President. I still remember the pain I felt when I first heard about the Long Island Railroad massacre, which happened in my own backyard. Today, December 7th, marks 30 years since the Long Island Railroad massacre. It is heartbreaking that the horrors of 30 years old, it is heartbreaking that the horrors of a tragedy 30 years old still feel like it happened yesterday. I remember the reports well. The 5:33 p.m. rush hour train from Penn Station, filled with commuters, average working Americans going home after a hard day's work to see their families. Moments later, a gunman unleashed carnage. 6 dead, 19 injured. Many more lives shattered, changed forever. Among those killed and injured were the husband and son of Carolyn McCarthy, a nurse from Mineola. Following the shooting, Carolyn began to advocate for tougher gun laws. Carolyn understood that something had to change. So after Carolyn's congressman at the time announced he'd be voting for the repeal of the assault weapons ban, that he would be voting to repeal, So after Carolyn's congressman at the time announced he would be voting to repeal the assault weapons ban that I had championed, I carried the law in the House. She took matters into her own hands and ran for a seat in the House and won on that issue. She served in Congress for 18 years with me and many of my colleagues in this building and remained a vocal advocate for stronger gun safety laws. So now, in memory of those lost and those injured 30 years ago, today, on the 5:33 p.m. Long Island Railroad train, I ask for this chamber to observe a brief moment of silence. Now, Mr. President, last night was a sad moment for the Senate, for the country, and for our friends in Ukraine and Israel and around the world. With our values and democracy on the line, Senate Republicans killed a much-needed bill with funding for Ukraine, for Israel, humanitarian aid for the people of Gaza, and for the Indo-Pacific. If there is a word for what we need now most, it is to be serious. Republicans need to be serious and stop game playing. Mr. President, it's absurd we're even in this situation to begin with. Let me retrace the steps that got us here and then how we can get out and get something done. First, we all know how important Ukraine aid is. Both sides have long claimed to support it. To quote a recent speech from my friend, the Republican leader, Leader McConnell, quote, "Helping a Democratic partner against an unprovoked attack from a common enemy is obviously in America's interests," unquote. In another speech here on the floor, Leader McConnell added that, quote, "Now is not the time to ease up," unquote, on helping Ukraine defending their sovereignty. Interestingly, he didn't mention anything about the southern border that day. Second, it was Republicans who threw an unnecessary wrench into Ukraine funding by tying it to the extraneous issue of border. We all agree that border security is important, President Biden included strong border provisions in the proposal he sent us. But we also know it's a complicated issue, very complex, that's escaped bipartisan solution for years. I am certainly willing to have that difficult conversation. I was a leader of the Gang of Eight that produced the last real border compromise a decade ago. But it's not realistic for Republicans to suddenly hold up Ukraine aid, which they claim to support, and then suddenly demand that we take up border, which has been a problem for years, and then solve it in a matter of days. Nevertheless, we Democrats were willing to give it a try. And that's my third point. For 3 weeks, Democrats have sat down at the negotiating table with our Republican counterparts to see if something on the border was possible. We talked for 3 weeks, and actually, negotiations ended up moving backward after Speaker Johnson said the only thing his Republican caucus would accept was Donald Trump's extreme border policies as embodied in H.R. 2. So Democrats tried to negotiate in good faith, but after the Speaker pushed H.R. 2, talks remained in an impasse. Fourth, to work our way out of this morass, we Democrats offered our Republican colleagues a golden opportunity, an offer for a vote on an amendment on any border policy of their choosing. And all they would have had needed to pass it were 11 Democratic votes. They rejected our offer. I must say, it defies credulity for Republicans to demand border, hold up Ukraine because of the border, then reject an offer to vote on a border amendment of their own crafting here on the floor. It may well be Republicans can't even agree among themselves on a proposal. Either way, they rejected our offer, voted down the bill. So where are we now that has happened yesterday? Well, we are left with only two paths to break forward. We are left with only two paths forward to break the logjam. Either Republicans can take us up on an amendment offer, or we can restart negotiations. Now, if we are to negotiate, it has to be in good faith. Republicans need to show they are serious about reaching a compromise, not just throwing on the floor, basically, Donald Trump's border policies. Again, Republicans need to be serious and stop the game playing. They've been game playing when they pushed Donald Trump's radical border policies, when they said border is the ransom they want, and when they moved the goalposts during negotiations. We need to stop playing around and get serious about the immense challenge in front of us. Both sides must accept that we have to compromise on things important to each side if we have any hope of passing the supplemental. Let me state, we Democrats very much want an agreement. We are willing to make compromises and concessions to meet our Republican colleagues as long as they are willing to do the same. Let me conclude, again, with how important this is and with the warning that the Republican leader issued in recent months, that if we aren't willing to invest in the defense of democracy right now, we're going to be forced to pay a much higher price down the line. Better to defend democracy with American resources today instead of American lives tomorrow. That is the danger of allowing brutes like Vladimir Putin to win the day. So the time is now for us to show the world we're willing to defend democracy in its hour of need. Democrats are serious about reaching a reasonable, bipartisan compromise to pass this security package. The question is if Republicans are now willing to do the same. Finally, Mr. President, on Hanukkah, Jewish people around the country and around the world will celebrate tonight the first night of Hanukkah. This year, more than most years, Hanukkah comes at a moment of grief, of trial, and of fear for many Jewish Americans. And perhaps for that, it is all the more meaningful. The story of Hanukkah is a story of perseverance in the face of unspeakable hatred. We've been taught about how the Jews of a different age, forced from their land, forbidden to practice their religion, their temple destroyed and desecrated, gathered to pray in secret, banded together in the hills and fields, and fought off their attackers. And once they endured they set about the hard and slow and painful work of rededicating the temple and lighting once again the eternal flame of hope. I believe that America should do the same thing right now, rededicate ourselves to that noble promise of being a land of tolerance for all people, all people. Anti-Semitism, frighteningly, is on the rise. Islamophobia is on the rise. Hatred and discrimination remain a festering wound in the soul of our country. We must rededicate ourselves to stand against anti-Semitism and all forms of discrimination. We must rededicate ourselves to building a more perfect union, one that preserves tolerance and equality for every single American. I have faith that the forces of intolerance will lose in the end, just as they did in the days of Hanukkah when Judah Maccabee led the Jewish people against an oppressive majority. I yield the floor.